When we open SPSS program, we will be faced with two tabs. Here we have data view. This is where we present our data and where we can observe our data. In variable view tab, we can give some attributes for our data to better describe it and to give more precision declaration of our data. Now, this data here is not original data. This is original data. In order to use most of the statistical tools in a SPSS program, we have to use codes instead of categories that comprise our data. And these are categories that are actual values for our variables, but instead of them we are going to use their codes. And this is something that should be declared in a variable view. This is where we define those labels. Now, if we want to enter data manually, we have to just type on any cell and type some data, for example 38, and we got ourselves a new variable. And this variable needs to have its name changed, and we need to declare some other attributes of this variable. We already have such attributes defined for these other columns, and they are here in variable view. Here in name, we should define a name for each of our variables. We just type something here and that will be a new name. In type, we can choose between these data types for each column that makes our data, and for most columns we are going to choose numeric, because categorical data will be presented with codes and all other data will mostly be numeric by its nature, and we can choose date and these other options not so often. We also have these two options, but we can declare them in these two columns. This width column or attribute is used only for textual data. So if we have some text, we can define that text cannot have more than 8 characters. Decimals are used only for numeric data, and this is only important for user for what they see in data view. This is not important for defining precision for calculation. This will not influence any of SPSS calculations. Only user will see 2 decimals. That's it. In label, we can give some short description for each variable, and in values, here is where we define those labels I was talking about earlier. So we have, for example, here some codes 1, 2, 3, and for each code we define a label. So if I want to enter a new code and label, I will type 4 and I will type, for example, from 31 to 40. After I click on add, this new code and label will be added to our list. If I choose one of the existing labels, I can remove them, and if I make some change, I can preserve that change by clicking on change button. When we declare our labels, we can easily enter new data just by using drop-down menu, because all possible values are already defined here. Now in missing, we can choose some values that are not acceptable or not logical. For example, we can say that 0 is not acceptable, and we can say that, for example, that 100 is not acceptable. One possibility is to define 3 such values, or we can define one interval value. For example, all values from 1 to 50 are not acceptable, and we can also add one discrete value, for example 55, and this value will not be valid. So if we define this for some column, let's say for some variable, let's say that this case has some unacceptable, for example 2 is not acceptable. In that case, SPSS will not use this and this case at all. It will just ignore them like they don't exist. It will consider this some kind of mistake or an error, and these values will not be, and cases will not be valid for further calculation. Then we can define width of a column. This is just a number of characters that will be shown to user. We can more easily change this by just making column wider. We do this to pop column, then we will get bigger number in this attribute, so it's not really that important attribute. Now in align, we can choose between left, right, and center alignment. And in measure, we can choose between scales. Now, this is not also really important. This is more important for user, so a user can know what type of data is, what type of scale is data using. This will not influence calculations in any way. We can choose between these three scales. And in row, we just leave the default value, and that would be input. If we don't have any data in our SPSS program, we can import it from Excel file. We go to File, Open, Data, and here we're going to choose only Excel files. And in our folder of choice, we will choose this Excel file. Here we have two sheets to choose from. Actually, this file has 3 sheets, but third sheet doesn't have any data. And as you can see, SPSS will recognize a range that has data in this sheet. Now we can also type some other range if we want to, but we will accept this range A1 to D7. We will click on OK, and we got our data into SPSS program. If we want to get data from database into SPSS program, we go to File, Open Database, New Query. Here we go to Add ODBC Data Source. We go in User DSN tab, we go to Add, and we can choose among these IBM SPSS drivers. Now all of these drivers are installed when we install IBM Data Access Pack. And I'm going to use those drivers. I'm going to connect to SQL Server. So this is a driver of my choice. We go to Finish. And now I have to provide credentials. After entering credentials, we can test our connection by clicking on Test Connection. We'll provide username and password. Okay. And we can see that our connection is successful. We go to OK, OK to close all dialogues, and now we have our connection created. We go to Next, and we have here a list of all tables and all of their columns. We are going to add this table as a whole. Now we can go to Finish. If we click on Finish, all columns from this table will be added to SPSS program. But we are going to add a couple more columns from this table. We're going to choose product subcategory key, English subcategory name, and product category key. In this case, we have 2 tables, so we cannot click on Finish. We have to go to on Next. And this is the place where we can define a relation between these 2 tables. Now this relation is already defined by inheritance from SQL Server, but if we want to create a new relation, we can just drag one column to another and let it go, and now we have a new relation. We can choose type of that relation, and we can select that relation and click on Delete on keyboard. Now that relation is deleted. There is another way to create relation. If we click on one column here and one column here, we can just click on Join, and then again a relation between these 2 columns will be established. Now we go to Next. We can go to Finish, of course, but we are going to go to Next. Now here we can add their part of SQL statement, but we are not going to do that here because it's much easier to do that in last screen of our database wizard. What is interesting here is that we can import only some rows from our tables. We can choose to import only 10% of all rows, or to import precise a number of rows from our tables. We're not going to use that. We go to Next. Here we can change a name of our columns, and important option here is that we can code all categories in this column. So this column has some string data types values, and we can code all of those categories into codes. Codes will be numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Then we go to Next. And here is an SQL statement, and we can change anything we want. In here, we can change where part of SQL statement or anything else. Now we have to go to finish, and our data will be imported into SPSS program. Columns that we decided to be encoded is this one, and instead of textual values, we can see we have codes, and these are original textual values.